As you can tell, I'm using notes today. For over 40 years, the American Catholic bishops have designated the month of October as Respect Life Month. We're probably aware of that. And it's a way to really focus on how we obviously should be respectful the year long, but this important Catholic value rooted in our way of following Jesus. And part of that, a number of years ago, American bishops promoted a consciousness to see that we are all called to live a consistent ethic of life. In other words, we've said this often, life from the very conception to natural death. But to have that respectful attitude and to be positive in proacting a culture that embraces the goodness of life and of love. And that doing that is a sacred responsibility because we realize every human being and creation itself was created by God to be good and created us to genuinely love one another and foster that goodness in our relationships and in our very planet. Today's gospel gives us another way to look at what is not about respecting life, rather about that violence, the irony that we're hearing it just the last couple days, but this gospel parable Jesus was telling then, not just for them at that time, but for us for all time. Any of the parables, we may not fully understand them, but say, okay, God, Jesus, what are you saying? What do we, what does our country and our world need to hear today? Especially about not only respecting life, but from a deeply spiritual faith place, reverencing life, reverencing it as gift from God. And the parable today describes a frightening pattern that is present in our own world, the pattern of escalating violence. The tenants kill the owner's servants, then sends more servants and kills them, and then says his own son and he kills the son. There are no winners in this when we choose to live in a world where violence can spin out of control and hurt us all. Also, just another aside to that parable, think about it. Jesus is the storyteller. He knew what he was saying. He knew he was trying to speak to the people there, especially religious leaders, to wake up, to go away from violence and violent attitudes. And think about it. He knew what was about to happen to him, clearly, that he would be crucified. And so including in that parable, that whole idea. And we know when he was crucified, he refused to meet violence with violence. Even on the cross, he forgave. And so as we look at that whole attitude, what does it mean for us to be our best as human beings? We're going to fall short, but to be our best in, whether it's in our family life, our community, our nation, to say no to violence. Even violent conversations and violent attitudes that we can all get into. We know that we need to repent of those. And especially even as we go in this Respect Life Month, and I'm going to talk a moment here about abortion, how to there too have an attitude that even with people we disagree, because we have strong convictions, that we don't develop a negative attitude toward them. As we look at this, I want to share a story. I may have shared this 2 or 3 years ago that I think is relevant as we look at this complicated issue of abortion that we can all be very intense about. I heard a woman, a doctor, a couple of years ago now, and I kept notes. She was interviewed about the issue of abortion. She was a strong black Catholic doctor and an opponent to abortion. And she stated that with everything happening around the matters of race, she was deeply grateful that at least in our country, we still have a ways to go in terms of violence toward a minority, that we were making progress, speaking out, and trying to do more to help bring black and white together as a community in our nation, valuing our diversity, not being threatened by it. That meant a lot. But then she mentioned she was also bothered that very few people were addressing the issue of black women aborting at 3 times the percentage of white women, and why they were doing this. Obviously for her, hopefully for us, consciousness raised, that seeing that this is a black injustice that needs a response. And that however we view it, that addressing the issue of abortion is obviously a moral quest. You know, our Ohio bishops are asking us in November to vote down issue 1 that would legalize abortion in almost all circumstances. And I know, going back to this doctor, she certainly was supportive of trying to emphasize that pro-life stance. However, she made this point that we all need to hear in complicated issues. She remarked that many people who are against abortion focus their attention only on the legal issue. Is the legal issue important? Sure. But she said it bothered her that what was not emphasized enough was trying to get at some of the underlying causes of abortion and how we respond to that, not just in legislature, in other ways too. As she brought up, and we know this, there is a need to assist mothers and fathers of the unborn to understand that abortion does not have to be the only way for them to get through this difficulty. Other underlying causes that we need to be supportive of include the reality of inadequate health care, poor paying jobs, having less education, including life skills. How do we understand and respond to that? And in a way, making this point from another point, something else that made her angry is that some people, not all, who claim to be pro-life were only concerned about the unborn until they were born. And back to what I kind of said earlier, what was often not paid attention to was all of us advocating for better health care, better pay for people who work in certain jobs that are put down, helping people to climb out of poverty, finding ways to combat the whole issue of hunger of too many people in our society, promoting racial justice, immigration practices, combating gun violence. I get it. When you hear that list, it's overwhelming. It's all part of the consistent ethic of life. We're not able to focus on everything, but each of us, there's maybe certain ways we can respond, and all of us can certainly be prayerful, and all of us can understand that this is living the consistent ethic of life from womb to tomb. Another point, though, that she made, she was frustrated because some people who are conveying that they care for all vulnerable people, she said some people she meets like that, they never mention the unborn and their parents as needing compassion and justice. We've said this before, that too often we live in a dualistic mindset about respecting life. So either I'm on this side, you know, respecting the unborn and the mothers, and should be. But then on this side, there may be those responding to these other life issues. And too often we can say, well, what's wrong with you in whatever why can't you see it the way I do, and why don't you focus just on this? Or why can't you see it the way we do and focus on that? How do we come together with our differences and recognize in so many of those situations we need to respond in a variety of ways? Again, consistent ethic of life. That is a beautiful gift of the Catholic Church giving to our American community. And as we look at this, we know that we need to be very careful where there's a different attitude of putting people down and judging intentions. I say that because, again, we are in our faith community strongly about doing what we can that abortion become lessened. But I know, maybe mentioned this before, thankfully we're not doing this. Early on in that pro-life movement with abortion, many people were taking signs outside of abortion clinics, signs that said, "You are a baby killer." You know, that's not what we're all about. Even the bishops finally said, no, People may see it from a different point of view. We may disagree with them in reverence for life, but also be respectful to them. We can differ with people, but respectfully. And when people are hurting and struggling with this issue or anyway, we need to be understanding and caring of them and say, I'm not going to bother with you because you see it this way. That respect life for us, we need to set the example of Jesus, who would show compassion toward all people, wherever we're coming from, even while differing on certain situations. So, we need to move away from violent attitudes that we can get when we have differences. How do we disagree with love? How do we disagree, not first of all, even with a very important virtue, ramming it down somebody's throat, but how do we first of all say, okay, if you see it differently, help me to understand where you're coming from. Help me to understand that so many people are coming from a good place. And for us, we need to exemplify that. Exemplify strong conviction about life in the womb, and exemplify strong respect for all people, including wherever they may be coming from. In saying that, we again shouldn't be saying, if people don't see it my way, they simply don't care about life. They very well may care about life from a different perspective. Again, can we disagree? Yes, but not put them down and automatically assume people have evil intent. The other part of all this is we all need to move away from violent attitudes when we have differences. And here, I just want to briefly comment on what St. Paul said in that second reading. And Paul, here again, Paul was in jail. Paul was in prison because he was a follower of Jesus. Paul easily in prison could have been bitter, could have been negative, could have told his followers outside of prison, get those people who put me here. Look what they did to me. They're awful. Condemn them. He didn't do that. Even from prison, influenced most of all by the presence of Jesus Christ, saying, this is what we need to focus on, all of us, wherever we're coming from. And just remember a part of that, because we can all go to the negative. We can all go to the hostile. We can all go to the unfairly unjust. And he says, reminds us this, that what we think often influences how we see the world and others and how we act. He says, whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, gracious, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing what you have learned and received and heard from Jesus. Then the God of peace will be with you. So for us, with everyone, recognizing how precious each human being is in our sight, wherever they're coming from, whatever they believe, reaching out to them with love. And as we go out day to day, we can look and see, are we doing that? Do we tend to look at people from a more positive, outreach, helpful perspective, or do we tend to, right away, even in our own families, go to the negative and the unfair? And so, basically, the scriptures remind us today this simple phrase. We are called to promote, especially by our example, a consistent ethic of life and a consistent ethic of love. Take that quiet moment to pray for all of us, for respect life in every way.